After I won Best Garden in the county, my neighbor bleached my plants and lied that I used illegal fertilizer. They took my award back while she bragged it was hers. But I found her receipts, fingerprints on my gate, and I brought them straight to the committee. I still remember the smell before I even saw what she did. Bleach. Sharp. Chemical. Wrong. It was just after sunrise when I walked out to water my garden, my pride and joy, the same garden that had won Best in County just a week before. Roses, dahlias, sunflowers, a whole patch of color I'd spent 3 years cultivating after my divorce. I'd poured everything into that little patch of earth. But that morning, every leaf, every petal, every stem had gone ghost white. Wilted, burnt, dead. At first I thought maybe there had been some freak overnight frost, but then I noticed it. The faint white splatter marks along the mulch, the chemical reek thick in the air, and the bleach bottle cap sitting in the grass near my gate. My hands were shaking when I looked over at her yard. Sandra, 50-something, retired, always dressed like she was attending a garden club meeting even when she was just collecting her mail. She stood there pretending to prune her azaleas, and when she saw me staring, she smiled. Not a polite smile, a knowing one. 3 hours later, I got a call from the county garden committee, the same people who'd given me the blue ribbon. They said there had been an anonymous report that I'd been using illegal fertilizer, a banned growth compound that enhanced flower pigmentation. They said they had to revoke my award until an investigation cleared me. Sandra watched me from her porch as I hung up. She was sipping coffee, smirking. When I confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. She just said, "That title belonged to me. Everyone knows I should have won last year, and this year too. You cheated, whether you admit it or not." I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. It wasn't just about flowers anymore. She destroyed something I built from my pain. That night, I sat on my porch until midnight, staring at my ruined garden. I knew I couldn't just let it go, so I started watching her. Closely. And that's when I found it, a receipt tucked in her trash bin for 6 gallons of bleach, dated the night before my garden died. But that was just the beginning. Because what I found next, her fingerprints on my gate latch, gave me everything I needed. And I brought them straight to, before the bleach, before the sabotage, before everything fell apart. Sandra and I were actually friendly. Not friends exactly, but neighborly. When I moved into the cul-de-sac in Hendersonville, North Carolina, 3 years ago, I was the divorced woman with too much time on her hands. My ex had left me for someone half my age, and I needed something to pour my energy into. That became the garden. It started as a small hobby, a few pots, some wildflowers. But by the second year, it became an obsession. I spent every spare dollar and hour cultivating that space. Sandra noticed early on. She'd been the neighborhood garden queen for over a decade. She had all the ribbons, all the magazine features, all the admiration. People would slow their cars just to take photos of her yard. And then I came along, younger, quieter, but more meticulous. At first, she'd offer tips, always phrased like compliments but actually little digs. "You know, if you really knew what you were doing, you'd mix peat moss with your compost." Or, "Sweetheart, that color combination is a bit loud, don't you think?" I brushed it off. Honestly, I didn't care about the competition. I just wanted peace. But when the garden committee nominated me for the annual county showcase, I saw something change in her. She stopped waving. She started copying my layouts, same border stones, same flower patterns. And she'd accidentally let her sprinklers hit my fence line whenever I was tending plants nearby. By the time the judges came that spring, the tension was thick. Sandra had been boasting to everyone that she had it in the bag again. But when the results were posted online, and my name, not hers, was announced as Best Garden in Henderson County, she didn't even congratulate me. That evening, she ripped her Garden of the Year sign out of her yard and threw it into her trash. A week later, she filed her first complaint with the county, claiming I was using unapproved chemical fertilizer. I laughed it off because the inspector found nothing. But she didn't stop. She started leaving anonymous notes in my mailbox. "You'll regret cheating your way to the top. Your flowers don't deserve that title. You don't deserve it either." I still tried to keep things civil. I even baked her a pie once after she had knee surgery. She didn't even open the door. Then the award ceremony happened. I wore a simple blue dress, took a few pictures with the committee, and drove home with the plaque sitting on my passenger seat like it was the only piece of happiness I'd earned in years. and she was waiting, standing at her fence, arms crossed. "I guess some people just get lucky," she'd said. I should have known it wasn't jealousy. It was hate, slow-growing, invasive, and poisonous. But even I didn't realize how far she'd go. Because that night, she'd already bought the bleach. And she wasn't done yet. After I found the bleach cap and the dead plants, I filed a police report. The officer who came out was polite but tired, like he'd rather be anywhere else. He took a few pictures, asked if I had cameras, I didn't, and told me he'd make a note of it. That was it. 2 days later, a letter from the County Garden Committee arrived. My award was temporarily revoked pending investigation. Apparently, the anonymous tip said I'd been using synthetic dyes to enhance bloom colors. They even quoted my supposed supplier. It was all fake, but it was written like someone who knew the gardening regulations inside out, someone like Sandra. The neighbors started whispering. People who'd once complimented my flowers now looked away when I waved. Someone even posted about me on the local Facebook group. "Isn't that the woman who cheated for the garden contest?" It crushed me. All I wanted was something of my own, something that didn't fall apart like my marriage had. Now even that was gone. That night, I sat in the dark scrolling through old pictures of my garden, the colors, the textures, the life, and something hardened inside me. I wasn't going to let her win, so I started digging. Literally and figuratively. First, I checked my trash can, nothing. Hers, though, that was a gold mine. A crumpled receipt from Lowe's. 6 gallons of bleach, heavy-duty gloves, industrial sprayer nozzle, plastic tarps, the date. The night before my garden died. Then I noticed something on my gate, faint smudges near the latch. I didn't think much of it until I remembered she'd always worn gardening gloves when outside. But bleach breaks down latex. If she'd handled the gate with bare hands afterward, maybe, so I called in a favor. My brother works maintenance at the local sheriff's office. I asked him to borrow one of the fingerprint kits they use for training demonstrations. He hesitated but handed me a small brush, powder, and lifting tape. That night, I dusted the gate. I didn't expect much, but when the black powder settled, 2 perfect prints appeared on the metal latch. I carefully lifted them and sealed them between 2 pieces of plastic. I had no idea if they'd hold up, but they were something. A few days later, I overheard Sandra talking to another neighbor on her front porch. "It's such a shame," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "I always told her shortcuts don't pay off." I stood there behind my window, watching her sip tea like she hadn't destroyed months of my work. And that's when I realized something else, her timing. She filed her anonymous complaint before the bleach even fully dried on my soil. Meaning she'd done both, the sabotage and the fake report, in one coordinated move. That wasn't impulse. That was planning. But planning works both ways. Because once I had her prints and her receipts, I knew I could hit her where it hurt most, her reputation. The one thing she'd built her whole life around. And I wasn't going to the police first. I was going straight to someone who hated her even more than I did. I thought my receipts and fingerprints were the smoking gun. I pictured Sandra squirming, confessing, crawling back to apologize while the county put my award back on my porch. I pictured the neighborhood shrugging and moving on. I was naive. 2 days after I sealed the prints in plastic, I went to the county office with everything in a folder, photos, the Lowe's receipt, the lifted prints. The woman behind the counter recognized me immediately. She had been at the award ceremony, smiling and pinching her paper program like everyone else. She looked sympathetic when I said the word sabotage. Then she excused herself and walked me down a hallway to the head of the committee's office. The head of the garden committee was a man named Tom Hargrove. He was the sort of official everyone trusts, gray hair, soft voice, a warm handshake. I slid the folder across his desk and told him simply, "She did this." Tom read the receipt. He frowned. He held the plastic with the prints to the light. He asked a few polite, probing questions. I felt like I was finally speaking to someone who measured justice in facts, not gossip. He promised an expedited review. He said he'd call me in a week. A week passed. No call, 2 weeks. Nothing. Meanwhile, the county's temporary revocation notice stayed on their website, and my social media feed blossomed with mean, small comments. I called. His voicemail was full. I wrote emails, no response. So I went back to the office in person. This time Tom met me in the lobby. He was smiling, but it was half a smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. He told me gently that he'd looked into the receipts and the prints and I will never forget the way he said it. They matched nothing his records could use to reopen the case. He said my evidence was compelling but procedurally insufficient. He offered, in the kindest possible tone, that sometimes controversies like this were unfortunate but unavoidable. I felt something hot and raw tear inside me. Unavoidable? My garden had been intentionally killed, my award yanked away. He made it sound like a lawn mower accident. I thought maybe I was missing something. Maybe I hadn't packaged it right. So I started asking questions about the investigation's timeline. Who filed the anonymous tip? Who had access to the complaint inbox? Who had veto power to suspend awards? The answers didn't add up. The anonymous tip had been submitted through an online form that flagged when the submitter used the committee office terminal to file from the county building. The IP logs showed the form was filled out between 9 o'clock and 9:15 p.m. on the night my garden died. Exactly the window when Sandra's receipt showed she was at Lowe's buying bleach. But the IP trace resolved not to Sandra's home, not to her phone, and not to her computer. It resolved to Tom Hargrove's desktop. Tom was the one who had filed the anonymous complaint. I sat in my car in the parking lot, the papers shaking in my hands. I kept thinking, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe he'd been trying to protect the committee's reputation by quickly flagging suspicious practices, and he used the office terminal because he was tired. Maybe, but the more I thought, the less those maybes mattered. Tom had the power to look at the prints properly. He had the authority to reopen the award case. He had the access to make the revocation stick. And then there was the look Tom and Sandra shared in the lobby when he handed me that flimsy procedural excuse. A look the same people use when they pass notes in church. She had friends on the inside. She had leverage. She had Tom Hargrove doing the dirty paperwork for her. And if Tom was in on it, then the police report that had gone nowhere suddenly made sense. The anonymous inspector, who claimed to find traces of a banned pigment, that too could be manufactured by someone who knew the exact rules and how to phrase a complaint so it would stick. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash something. Instead, I folded my hands over the folder and did the only thing that felt possible. I walked back to my car and drove home, heartbeat jumping like a trapped animal, because I realized this wasn't just a neighbor feud anymore. This was systemic. And if this had been planned with help, then whatever I did next would have to be smarter than petty vengeance. It would have to outmaneuver two of them. So I started making a list. I didn't know yet who I could trust. I only knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go to the committee, and I couldn't trust the cops yet. I called one person instead, the one person I swore I'd never drag into my mess. The person I called was my ex-husband, Mark. Yeah, that Mark, the man who walked out after 12 years of marriage and left me to rebuild myself with dirt and seeds. But Mark was also an investigative journalist before he became a corporate PR mouthpiece. If anyone knew how to expose a lie, it was him. When he picked up, I didn't even try to hide the bitterness in my voice. "I need help," I said, "and it's about the garden." He laughed softly. "You're still on that?" Someone destroyed it. Then filed a fake complaint that got my award revoked, and I think the head of the committee helped her. Silence. Then, "Okay, tell me everything." I met him at a diner on the edge of town. I brought the folder, the receipts, the lifted prints, the email correspondence, even screenshots of Sandra's public Facebook posts about cheaters in the gardening world. He read through everything, his brow furrowed like it used to when he was deep in a story. When he looked up, he said, "You've got a story here, but not the one you think." He explained that what Sandra and Tom did wasn't just pettiness, it was corruption. Apparently, Sandra had been a consistent donor to the county's beautification fund, the same fund Tom managed. She donated enough money over the years that she essentially owned her seat at the table. If I won, her reputation took a hit, and Tom's little side arrangement might have been exposed. Mark told me we needed proof that Tom and Sandra had been coordinating. Emails, payments, phone calls, anything connecting them. And that meant digging where no one else had looked, their digital footprint. He taught me how to file a public records request for internal emails sent from Tom's county email address during the week of the incident. It was legal, public, and they couldn't deny it without raising suspicion. While waiting for that, I started collecting visual evidence. Every night, I sat in the dark with my camera pointed at Sandra's yard. I wasn't stalking her, I just wanted to see if she'd slip again. And she did. One night, I caught her sneaking across her backyard with a sprayer. She was spraying something along the fence line between our properties, likely trying to keep weeds down. But the wind was blowing toward my side again. I took photos. Time-stamped. 3 days later, my public records request came through. It was supposed to take 2 weeks, but maybe someone in the clerk's office liked seeing powerful people sweat. And there it was, an email chain between Tom and Sandra from the week before my award was revoked. Tom, if she really is using that stuff, it's an easy fix, just need something tangible. Sandra, don't worry. I can make it look real, I'll handle the sample. Tom, then I'll handle the paperwork. The title's yours next year, promise? My hands shook as I read it. Make it look real. That meant she planted evidence, maybe even fabricated soil samples. It was calculated, malicious, and stupidly arrogant to leave in writing. Mark leaned across the booth and said, "This is enough to bury them. But not if you go in guns blazing. You'll scare them into covering their tracks." So we came up with a plan. I'd play nice. Pretend I'd accepted the committee's decision. I'd post something calm and gracious on the neighborhood page, something like, "I respect the process and thank everyone for their support. The garden will bloom again." Sandra would think I'd given up. Meanwhile, Mark would contact a local news reporter, one who loved small-town corruption stories. The reporter would pose as a new gardener looking to learn the ropes from Sandra and Tom, recording everything. And once the story broke, once the emails and receipts went public, Sandra's perfect reputation would collapse overnight. That was the plan. Simple, strategic. But plans don't survive contact with people like her. Because before the story could run, something else surfaced, something that flipped the entire thing upside down. A name, a bank record. And a second bleach purchase, not made by Sandra. It was a Thursday morning when Mark called me. I could tell from his tone something was off. "Don't freak out," he said. But the second bleach purchase wasn't Sandra's. "What are you talking about?" He explained that while going through transaction data tied to Sandra's donations, the reporter found another receipt linked to a different card. It was for 3 more gallons of bleach, gloves, and an industrial sprayer. Same store, same night, just 40 minutes later. But the card belonged to Lisa Hargrove, Tom's wife. I felt my stomach drop. "Wait," I said slowly, "so Tom's wife bought bleach too? Why would she?" Mark cut me off. "I don't think she just bought it. I think she's the one who actually did it, the spraying." At first, I thought he was joking. But when he explained the timeline, it started making awful sense. Sandra's car had been parked in her driveway when my garden was destroyed. Her porch camera proved she never left that night. But the bleach splatter patterns the police photographed came from outside my gate, like someone leaned in from the sidewalk and sprayed through the bars. That would have taken less than a minute. Quick, easy, invisible if you did it after midnight. And Lisa lived 2 streets over, close enough to walk. The connection between Sandra and Lisa was more than friendship. Lisa was president of the County Garden Circle, a club that fed nominations to the same committee Tom chaired. She was the gatekeeper of prestige. If Sandra lost, Lisa's circle lost face. So they'd conspired together, Lisa doing the dirty work, Sandra planting the fake fertilizer complaint, and Tom covering it all up. It was a perfect triangle of corruption. When I realized it, I couldn't breathe. These weren't just jealous neighbors. They were a small-town cartel protecting their social crown. Mark told me the reporter was still collecting proof, but I couldn't sit still anymore. I drove past Lisa's house that afternoon. Her yard was immaculate, a soulless perfection, not a leaf out of place. But when she saw me drive by, she froze mid-step. I swear, the color drained from her face. That night, someone banged on my door at 11:45 p.m. I looked through the peephole, no one there. Just a manila envelope sitting on the mat. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "You need to stop before you embarrass yourself further. This isn't a fight you can win." No signature, but the handwriting was shaky and thin, like an older woman's. Probably Lisa's. That's when I stopped sleeping. Every car that passed felt like surveillance. Every rustle outside made me jump. They weren't just covering tracks now, they were trying to scare me off. Mark kept saying, "Let the story run first, don't do anything rash." But I was past that. This wasn't just about my garden anymore. This was about being humiliated, erased, lied about again. So I made my own plan, one separate from the news story. Something they wouldn't see coming. I remembered the county fair coming up in 2 weeks, the same one where Sandra would be presenting her award-winning garden tips. Lisa and Tom were both scheduled to attend, front row. Perfect audience. I started preparing a display of my own, not flowers this time, evidence, every receipt, every photo, every timestamp, even the email printouts. I printed a huge poster with the subject line of Tom's email. Make it look real. It wasn't legal protocol. It wasn't subtle, but it would be loud. And once it was out there, they couldn't hide anymore. Except, as I was printing the last sheet the night before the fair, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It was a picture of my new seedlings, crushed, and underneath it one word, enough. They had been in my yard again. And the next morning I was done playing nice. By the time the county fair rolled around, I wasn't just angry anymore, I was hollow. You know that point where grief burns out and what's left is cold, surgical focus? That's where I was. Mark tried to talk me out of showing the evidence publicly. Let the reporter handle it, he said. Let them bury themselves. But he didn't understand. They hadn't just poisoned my garden. They'd taken something that had kept me alive. I set up my booth across from Sandra's display. Her setup was nauseatingly perfect, pastel banners, flower arrangements, and a giant sign that said Cultivating Community. I had one table, one board, and a folder of proof. But before I could even start pinning things up, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Tom. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked tired. His eyes were dark and his tie was loose. You don't want to do this, he said quietly. Why? Because it'll make you look bad, he sighed. You don't understand. None of this was supposed to happen. Then he told me the real reason, the chilling reason. Apparently, the County Beautification Fund, the one Sandra had donated to, was being audited. The auditors had flagged unusual transactions, small withdrawals disguised as reimbursements. Tom had been skimming from the fund for years. Sandra knew about it, and Lisa, as president of the Garden Circle, had signed off on fake community maintenance receipts to make it look legitimate. It was a loop. Tom approved payouts to vendors. Lisa signed them off. Sandra donated back a portion through the same fund, making it look clean. But when I won the award, the auditors took notice. My garden had cost a fraction of what Sandra claimed hers did in prior years. That triggered a closer look at her receipts, which tied right back to the fund. If my win stood, it would have unraveled everything. The donations, the audits, the kickbacks. So they decided to destroy me before anyone could dig deeper. Sandra volunteered to handle the problem. Lisa did the dirty work, Tom buried the paperwork. They didn't just want the title back, they needed to protect their entire scheme. My flowers weren't competition, they were evidence. I just stood there, my hands shaking. You let her do that to my garden to protect your theft? Tom didn't even flinch. You'd be surprised what people will do to keep what they think they've earned. I realized then that he wasn't confessing out of guilt, he was warning me. Trying to get ahead of what was coming. Because if the story went public, they were all going down. Before he walked away, he said, "You still have time to walk away. We can fix this quietly." I didn't say a word. I just stared at him until he turned back towards Sandra's booth. I watched her laugh, chatting with visitors, pretending her hands weren't the same ones that mixed bleach and death. And that's when the numbness cracked. I'd been careful, patient, polite, but I wasn't walking away. I wasn't fixing this quietly. If they wanted a show, I was about to give them one they'd never forget. Because the reporter was already in the crowd, camera on, mic hot, and I was minutes away from pulling the pin on everything. The fairgrounds were packed that afternoon, families with kids, retirees, garden hobbyists. Everyone who'd whispered behind my back was there. Perfect audience. Sandra was mid-speech about integrity in community gardening when I walked onto the small stage with my folder and that giant printed email, the one that read, "Make it look real." People started murmuring. Tom froze in the crowd. Lisa's face went pale. I stepped up to the mic. My voice was shaking, but loud enough for everyone to hear. I was accused of cheating for my garden award, I said. My flowers were destroyed. My reputation trashed. But I have proof that the people who accused me weren't protecting the integrity of this community, they were protecting themselves. Then I flipped the board around. Email screenshots, receipts, Lisa's bleach purchase, Sandra's Lowe's receipt. A printed copy of the IP trace report showing the complaint came from Tom's county computer. You could feel the air shift. The crowd leaned in. I kept going. For years, this committee has been using the county's beautification fund like a personal bank account. Fake vendor payments, fake donations, and when someone outside their circle finally won, they destroyed her garden to cover their tracks. Someone from the audience yelled, "Is this true?" Tom opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the reporter, the one Mark had connected me to, stood up, camera still rolling. "We can confirm all of it," she said, "and the audit files are being turned over to the state inspector today." Sandra's knees actually buckled. Lisa grabbed her arm. Tom looked like he'd seen a ghost. I stepped back from the mic and just watched. Sandra tried to say something, but the reporter's camera was inches from her face. Tom muttered about lawyers and context, but everyone could see the panic in his eyes. Within hours, the story hit local news. By evening, the county's Facebook page was flooded with comments demanding resignations. 2 days later, the state launched an investigation into fund misuse. Tom was suspended. Lisa resigned from the garden circle. And Sandra, she locked herself inside her house and stopped showing her face altogether. A week after the story broke, the County Garden Committee publicly reinstated my title. They even tried to deliver a new plaque. I didn't answer the door. I didn't need it anymore. Instead, I went out to my backyard, the same patch of land that once smelled like bleach and rot, and started again. I didn't plant flowers this time. I planted herbs, stronger things, things that could survive rough soil. Mark came by once while I was working. He looked around and said, "You really did it." I just shrugged. No, they did it to themselves. By the end of summer, my yard was green again, not perfect, but alive. Every time I looked at it, I thought about how people like Sandra and Tom build their worlds on control, on fake appearances. And how quickly all of that crumbles when someone refuses to stay quiet. One morning, I found an anonymous letter in my mailbox. No threats this time, just 2 words written in the same shaky hand as before. "You won." I burned it. Then I went back to my garden, poured my coffee, and watched the sunlight spill across the new growth. They'd tried to bleach the life out of everything I loved. But life has a way of growing back deeper roots, stronger stems. And this time, I didn't plant it for beauty. I planted it as proof.